Hello, and welcome to my Hunter x Hunter retrospective. This is the beginning of a long series where I intend to discuss every chapter of the manga, sharing all of my thoughts and feelings. I've been meaning to do this in some form or another for quite some time now, and I'm extremely excited to finally get started, as this is my favorite work of fiction. The format is experimental at this point, as I simply hit record and improvise without a script, something I have zero experience with on this channel, so I hope it turned out okay. As this is a retrospective, it's intended for people like myself who has either watched or preferably read the story, so spoilers for future events are to be expected. Anyway, grab a drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hunter x Hunter begins by introducing us to the concept of hunters, unsurprisingly, but not in very explicit or literal terms, but instead in a more vague, non-expository manner. The idea is that there is an unknown world out there, full of unexplored locations and treasures and monsters, and this unknown mystery has a magical connotation to it. Not in a literal, but in a more of a figurative sense. And there are certain people that are drawn towards this magic, and these people are referred to as hunters. And that is, for the most part, what we learn and understand about them from the very start. And just like our main character Gon, we are going into this story and into this adventure kind of blind to what is out there. And we get to learn about this world alongside him, which is partly why I find him so engaging to be around, because we get to experience everything together. It's especially effective because Gon has grown up on this whale island, completely isolated from the rest of society and the rest of the larger world, and essentially goes in completely blank, only having received a little bit of information from his encounter with Kite. As the story progresses, they will slowly start feeding us more and more information, first and foremost about hunters and what it means to be a hunter, what hunters do, actually spending an entire arc doing this exact thing, before even really properly unleashing us into this world, into its cities, its cultures, even its power system, which I think works exceptionally well in order to allow us to properly get familiar with these main set of characters without becoming too bloated. As we all know, Togashi loves to really indulge in a lot of information. I mean, in fact, he creates an entire arc that revolves around a card game where there's at least 100 cards, all of which have names, functions, etc. He does love to make things needlessly complicated in a sense. Having those aspects show up too early, I feel could be a little intimidating. And the only reason I really care to explore all of these interesting ideas is because I feel familiar with the character cast and therefore invested in learning about the world that they inhabit, in a sense. But we're already moving ahead a bit, so let's stay focused on Gon and Whale Island for now. Our first exposure to Gon is the fishing scene, which I really enjoy in the terms of its surprise element. Before really flipping the page, all you think is that it's a normal kid fishing something that would seem to be normal, but instead he reels in this giant beast with like insect-like legs, clearly not just any normal fish, doing it very casually, very enthusiastically, and then proceeding to carry it all the way from the forest down to the port. Clearly giving off an impression that this is no normal kid, and it is a very happy-go-lucky kind of kid. Really contrasting his initial very calm, very focused, demeanor as he is waiting for the fish to take the bait. Anyway, we learn then that this was all part of a test that was initiated by his aunt Mito in order for him to qualify to apply for the hunter exam. Everyone down there are surprised, they stand in awe. No one would have expected Gon to be able to catch this fish, saying even 5 grown men couldn't pull it in together, and no one has been able to do this for years. Gon immediately, he doesn't beat around the bush, he's simply saying, look, just like I said, I would catch him, now it's your time to keep your end of the bargain, allow me to apply for the hunter exam. Everyone's kind of like, come on, Mito, just let him do it already. Clearly he has proven himself, he has the stuff to become a good hunter. Which upsets Mito, saying, that's easy for you to say, we're talking about sending off my child here. It's just not that simple for her, right? And I really like this line that Gon says in response. He essentially says something along the lines of, it's one thing to say something, right? But to actually mean it and to go through with it, that's something entirely. Right, Aunt Mito. Clearly, Mito is the kind of person who has taught Gon the value of keeping promises, and now he is kind of using it back against her, making sure that she also manages to keep her words, which is a very cheeky manner and the first kind of glimpse into Gon's character. Mito ends up agreeing, not satisfied with it, but a promise is a promise. She hands him the application card, or whatever you want to call it, and she heads back inside her house. As Gon goes off to mail this application, Mito and her, I assume it's her mother, it could also be her grandmother, I don't quite remember, but the grandmother, I suppose you could call her, they are having a conversation about Gon's father, Jing. Mito is upset and frustrated and in panic in a sense, because the fact that Gon's father was a hunter was supposed to be a secret. She never told him this, she kept it from him. She can't wrap her head around how did he find out. But the grandmother says that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how we found out, like this would happen no matter what. She expected this all along. That's just one look into Gon's eyes and you can tell. You know, blood will tell in a sense. He was destined to follow in his father's footsteps in this manner. Mito, however, is struggling to accept it. It's then we learn that Gon did in fact know about this all along, but before proceeding to find out exactly how, Gon runs into the forest where he runs into his animal best friend, I guess you would call him, the fox bear Khan. We get a quick little montage of them simply hanging out, eating, fishing, just enjoying the wildlife together, clearly showing Gon's familiarity with this world. And then the flashback drops of 3 years prior. Gon is attacked by an adult fox bear and on the verge of being killed before Kite steps in, intercepts, and goes on to kill the fox bear in order to save Gon's life. The introduction we get to Kite is that he is not pleased with having to perform this action, having to actually end this fox bear's life, especially as it is with its cub, but he reasons that no wild animal that attempts to kill a human can be left to live. He essentially chooses the life of a human over an animal. Looking like he's about to comfort Gon, he instead ends up punching him and then lectures him, saying that you fool, you should know better than to wander around the forest at this time of year. These foxbears even mark their territory as so to tell other creatures to stay away, as it is protecting its cub. Didn't you know? Didn't your father teach you this? Gon then drops the bombshell to Kite that his parents are gone. He doesn't have any dad who could have taught me this, saying that they died in some kind of accident after he was born and he's only living with his aunt. Kite clearly has a heart. I mean, at the end of the day, he saved this human and he recognizes the sadness behind Gon's words. The foxbear cub, however, is obviously saddened of its mother's death and is becoming very hostile as Kite is walking up to it. Gon wonders what he is planning to do with this cub now that its mother is dead, to which Kite says to simply put it down. He reasons that this cub still needs its mother. It's probably going to starve to death. It hasn't been weaned, but even by the smallest of chances it does survive, it will bear a grudge against humans and become dangerous for the people on this island, right? Gon then runs up to this cub, holds it, despite the cub scratching and, clawing, biting him, clearly not having it, but Gon just sits there determinedly holding this cub tight, right? Saying that he'll take care of it. Kite says this is useless, like fox bears, they're wild to the core. But Gon simply looks up at Kite with his determined eyes, to which Kite immediately recognizes. He asks if his father was a man named Jing. Gon is immediately intrigued. He asks, do you know my dad? And there's this cute little moment of a little bit of a humanization to Kite there as... I don't know the exact translations, but I'm assuming that he calls him like an old man, to which Kite is like, old man, before he gets back to his senses. Clearly being younger than he seems. He then explains to Gon that his dad is the reason he's even here to begin with. This was his birthplace and he came here looking for clues, and determining that this is one hell of a clue right here. He introduces himself as Kite and that he is a hunter, saying that Jing is his teacher. There's a nice little detail in this scene as they're sitting down, clearly having talked for a while. It looks like they have even made a grave for the mother fox bear. We see, which we now obviously we know is Khan, kind of lurking in the background, more docile now, simply observing them as they're having this conversation. He explains to Gon the things Jing has done for Kite, teaching him the basics of the hunt and how he has been passed a final test which is to find him, saying that this is the most challenging hunt ever. Simply put, Jing is just being very, very hyped up, being explained as the best hunter there is, saying what he has done for him. If it weren't for him, he wouldn't even be here anymore. And Gon is simply captivated by this. In a sense, you could say that Kite in many ways here becomes like a father figure, as he's there in Jing's stead. And despite them talking about Jing, and despite Jing kind of being the person of interest, right, the inspiration, it is at the end of the day Kite who is giving Gon this information. And it is Kite who saved him, which I think is very key in order to understanding Gon's relationship with Kite, and obviously the things that will transpire in the Chimera Ant arc down the line. But ultimately a very important reason for why Gon sets off on this adventure to begin with. Kite then finally reveals that Jing is alive, that Mito did in fact lie, but also reasoning that she didn't do it out of any bad intentions. She was protecting him. She didn't want him to find out, and she probably didn't want to lose him either. He also repeats kind of what the grandmother was talking about, how blood will tell, right? And that there is no doubt that this is Jing's son. He also says that all good hunters get along well with animals, and we see Khan actually coming up to him, and they start their friendship together. Kite also leaves behind what we later find out is Jing's hunter license, but you know, that's something we can get into much later. But back in real time, as Gon is holding that hunter license in his hands, he's determined, and there's something about his demeanor that really changes, because up until now he's portrayed that very happy-go-lucky attitude that's, you know, you probably associate most with Gon. But there's something about his display of determination from this point on. In a sense, he feels like now everything is beginning. He's about to embark on this quest, and his resolve is firm, and you can see it in his demeanor completely. He gets up and says, "Now then, this is it, Khan. I'm going to become a hunter." A hunter sometimes have to do things that animals don't like, or may even hate, such as we have already been introduced to. Khan is supposed to be this king of the forest, right? A king of the forest cannot be friends with a hunter. And Gon does not want to jeopardize that for Khan in any way, and he wants him to proceed to rule the forest, right? Khan understands this and calmly walks away, but he gathers with the rest of the animals of the forest, and they all kind of line up to give Gon a proper send-off. And with that, Gon waves goodbye, runs off, just saying, you know, you rule the forest now, and starts heading back home to prepare. It's a very sweet and simple scene, I think. Before Gon gets to set off on the adventure, we get to see him kind of resolve any loose end before heading out, right? He doesn't leave anything behind. He makes sure that he said his farewell to Khan, he will go and say his farewell to Mito, and then he can leave with no regrets. Upon entering home, Gon finds Mito sitting at a table, presumably drinking to cope, right? But regardless, simply sitting there in silence. Now the situation is a little bit tense. There's a tension between the two of them, right? Neither has really talked about this with each other, like ever. Mito has held it a secret. Gon has held it a secret that he knew, and they're finally confronting each other about this, in a sense. So she asks, you know, you knew all along about Jing and who he is? Gon says, yeah. And then she asks what has probably been the most difficult question that she really never wanted to ask, or the thing she never wanted to say to him, which is, you know, he did leave you when you were still a baby. Like, he abandoned you, he left you behind. Despite that, you know, are you still willing to do this? And then Gon responds very curiously, you know. At this point, you would expect that upon finding out that you have been abandoned, that your father is still alive and has been alive all this time and has never come to see you, and that he's off there in the world doing something completely different, you would think that being a hunter would be the last thing Gon would want, or that he would bear some kind of grudge against his father. But instead, he internalizes this and he responds with that being a hunter must be a job so important, so amazing, that he was willing to leave me behind. And he thinks that's how amazing being a hunter is. He says this as he's staring into Mito with his determination in his eyes. The same eyes that Kite immediately recognized. And this frightens Mito in a sense. and she storms away, saying, "You really are his son after all." There's no denying it. Now, we obviously don't have all the context we need for Mito's character at this point. Most of it will really be revealed as we return back home in the intermission between Heaven's Arena and Yorknew. But she's nonetheless a very understandable character. Having been the sole caregiver for Gon, the last thing she wants is to lose him. And she definitely doesn't want to lose him, just like she lost Jing. Gon is left by himself in the room, and he clearly understands Mito and he feels bad for her in the situation. But at the end of the day, he is Jing's son. And his determination after meeting Kite has simply grown too strong. I mean, there are just a lot of arguments that can be made about Gon's intentions here, right? Is this a coping mechanism of some sort? Having been abandoned by his father, does he feel like he has to prove himself to show that he was worth it? I just think it's very amazing how they can set Gon up so effectively in this single chapter, because a lot of people might look at Gon and think he's a pretty simple, straightforward character, and I guess you could argue in a sense he might be. I think at the end of the day, this very idea about why he wants to prove himself so bad is the sign of his complexity, and which we also will get many inclinations of in the future. Gon just is so willing to open up to things, whether good or bad. So you could also argue that the idea that he has been abandoned, which other people will hear and immediately say, yeah, that's a negative thing for a father to do. Gon doesn't simply see it in terms of good or bad. But this could easily have been different had he not met Kite, had Kite not been the one to reveal this to him, right? Because Kite introduces Jing as this amazing figure, which in turn makes the concept of Hunter being this amazing thing to do. So there is no reason for Gon to simply conform with this idea that it is an inherent bad act to leave your son, because he will rationalize it by saying that, well, it was for this amazing reason. As long as it's a good reason, it's fine. And it has to be a good reason, because Kite said so. I think this attitude is what really opened me up to Gon in the matter of minutes. And this consistency in his character is really remarkable. But we can get back to that at some other point. Anyway, it's a week later, and Gon is ready to set off. He's down at the port, there's a ship waiting for him, everyone on the island is there to send him off, giving him all the love and support, just establishing really that despite having been abandoned, he still always had people looking out for him. Mito, of course, also comes down to say goodbye. Clearly, the relationships have been strained for the last week. It seems like Gon, as he walks up to her, isn't quite sure what to say. It sounds a little bit distant, right? Simply saying, well, thank you for all. And then Mito says that she's sorry for lying once again. It wasn't that Jing abandoned him, it's that she made Jing give him up. Now, clearly, there's a lot of implications here, right? While it is most likely true that this happened, that does not by any means prove that Jing would have raised Gon if it weren't for Mito's interference, right? I think at the end of the day, Jing was always going to do what he did, but he probably wanted to at least try. Mito probably knew about Jing that this wouldn't be the case. He would never stay there. And if anything, if he did initially only to leave later, by a certain time that Gon would have grown any kind of attachment to him, that would have been even harder. And Mito knows this, because that's exactly what she has experienced. But Gon, however, he understands. He says he pretty much figured that one out, because she never looks him in the eyes when she lies. They make up in a sense, they hug each other, and Gon steps foot on the ship, saying his goodbye and saying that he'll come back as a great hunter. The atmosphere changes quite drastically on the ship as we're met with the reality of what Gon is actually doing. Now, everything has seemed very grand and adventurous, very, I guess, childlike so far, but here we have all these very rough-looking adults, right, that are saying, this kid must be having a laugh, like, becoming a great hunter isn't that simple. There's a ton of people out there trying to do it, and only a small number of those people even make it. And even by making it to the exam itself, you might as well end up dead. So don't be full of yourself. Gon has no rebuttals, he isn't angered by this, he simply gives these men a look. But his determination certainly is not going to falter because of this, because I'm sure he was already fully ready for the reality of the situation. And thus ends the first chapter. There's an interesting little narration, but the captain apparently says, like to himself in the background, it's going to be rough. And the words linger in Gon's mind. I really love this line. Because you could take that in any way you want. He could be simply talking about the ride to the Hunter exam. He could be talking about the Hunter exam itself. He could also just be talking about this entire adventure. And as we all know, it is indeed going to be rough. And I think it's a great kind of ending line for this chapter, and in a sense, an opening line for the rest of the series. I don't know why, it really stuck with me when I read that. And especially in retrospect, it's very powerful. So before ending this video, and I suppose leaving chapter 1 behind, I would just like to share some final thoughts, specifically about the characters that have been introduced so far. First up, we have Gon. While I might have touched upon aspects of this, I don't think I've quite put it into words, so I'll try as best as I can. But what I think lies at the core of my interest in Gon is how he is able to so perfectly portray his age, right? Being this child so very well, having the kind of childlike naivety that he does. It is also starkly contrasted by a lot of maturity. Anything from holding on to the lessons he's learned from Mito, to how his encounter with Kite and the things he taught him, the things he said, how much it has affected him, taking responsibility for his actions. Because I think I failed to mention exactly how much I appreciate the scene of Gon holding on to Khan in the flashback. Gon ends up getting scolded, and he immediately understands the severity of the situation. He feels terrible. He feels guilty. His ignorance led to this fox bear dying, and now this cub is left without its parents. Obviously something he can relate to a lot, but essentially wanting to now raise this cub could also be some sort of atonement. And while a lot of his logic can be seen as very childish, the way he uses it and the way he interacts with people, which in the case of this chapter would be Mito, there's just something very adult about it. I like how his relationship with Mito is a little bit complicated because of the secret, but Gon is never upset at Mito. He never blames her. And this is where Kite comes in. He really helped shaping Gon in a lot of ways. And like I talked about earlier, being this kind of father figure, he was the one to kind of teach him the ways of the forest, and he was the one to give a very level-headed take on Mito's decision to essentially lie to him. And you know, with Kai, despite being mentioned a couple times throughout the series, he's only really prevalent in this chapter, up until obviously the Chimera Ant arc. And I think not only in terms for Gon, but also for me, the reader, he manages to leave such a strong impression. Not just as a standalone character, but for just the overall message of this chapter and of the series going forward. I guess you could call it the spirit of Hunter x Hunter. And in the case of Mito as well, having even less relevance in the series, is also someone who I find very impactful. She's kind of in and out, but serves her purpose tremendously well. And she isn't portrayed as this perfect mother who knows everything, deals with every situation flawlessly. She's very human. She's a bit awkward about things, but she has clearly done a fantastic job raising Gon. And I mean, it's like Gon ends up saying in the end that she is the only mother I have. I don't know. It's just really fucking wholesome. Anyway, I am sure there is a lot of things I might have missed, maybe upon rereading, maybe upon editing this video. I might come across things that was like obvious, like how could I miss that? But that's bound to happen. I can only do so much in one video. But this is why it excites me so much to share this with everyone, so you guys can chime in, give your observations, maybe even disagree with some of my takes. I want us to just explore this series for all it's worth. So to be completely honest, I just want to end this recording right now so I can just start editing and publish as soon as possible. So I think with all that said, I'm just gonna end it here for now, and we'll continue on in the next part. I don't know how many chapters I will cover per video, considering that obviously the first one is going to be a bit more dense, it's longer, and as it is the beginning of the story, there's obviously just more ground to cover. But only time can tell, really. So thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe so you can keep up with this series. I can't give any promises in terms of the frequency of uploads. I will try to stay as consistent as possible, but ultimately no promises. Alright, have a blessed day everyone.